Good evening. I'm addressing you tonight from a secure location following urgent classified briefings regarding what intelligence analysts are calling the most dangerous escalation in Latin America since the Cuban Missile Crisis. What I'm about to share represents assessments that reveal a rapidly deteriorating situation that could draw the United States into a regional conflict with global implications. The information I'll present tonight comes from our most sensitive intelligence sources, including communications intercepts, satellite reconnaissance from U.S. Southern Command, and diplomatic reporting that paints a picture of Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro preparing what appears to be a desperate military gamble that could destabilize the entire northern coast of South America. For too long, Washington has treated Venezuela as a contained crisis, an isolated authoritarian regime causing primarily humanitarian concerns rather than strategic threats. That assessment has proven dangerously inadequate. What we're witnessing is the transformation of Venezuela from a failing state into an active regional threat backed by Chinese military advisors and Russian weapons systems. Over the next several minutes, I'll walk you through Venezuela's systematic preparation for territorial expansion into Guyana's oil-rich Essequibo region, the involvement of Chinese and Russian military assets that could turn a regional border dispute into a proxy conflict with global powers, and Brazil's unprecedented military mobilization in response to what they view as an existential threat to regional stability. This isn't simply about South American politics. The Essequibo region contains oil reserves that could rival Saudi Arabia's proven deposits, while Venezuela's actions threaten shipping lanes that carry 40% of U.S. energy imports. More critically, Chinese and Russian military advisors operating from Venezuelan territory represent the establishment of hostile military presence in America's strategic backyard for the first time since the Cold War. The stakes extend far beyond regional security to encompass fundamental questions about American credibility in our own hemisphere and our ability to prevent authoritarian powers from establishing military footholds that could threaten U.S. homeland security for decades to come. Global stage. In the classified assessment rooms where America's hemispheric security is planned and protected, a disturbing analysis has emerged that fundamentally challenges our understanding of Venezuelan capabilities and intentions. Traditional frameworks that treated the Maduro regime as an isolated pariah state have proven inadequate for addressing a comprehensive military buildup supported by Chinese technology and Russian weapon systems. As I review the latest intelligence on Venezuelan military preparations and foreign military assistance, one fact becomes unmistakably clear. We are witnessing the transformation of Venezuela from a failing state into a proxy platform for Chinese and Russian power projection in the Western Hemisphere. This represents more than regional instability. This is the establishment of hostile military capabilities within striking distance of critical American strategic interests. The scope of Venezuelan military preparations extends far beyond what would be necessary for defensive purposes or internal security operations. What we're observing is the systematic deployment of offensive military capabilities designed to project force beyond Venezuelan borders while providing Chinese and Russian advisors with operational experience in American strategic environments. Venezuelan territorial claims over Guyana's Essequibo region have provided the pretext for military preparations that intelligence assessments indicate could be activated on extremely short notice. The discovery of massive offshore oil deposits in disputed waters has transformed what was previously a dormant border disagreement into an existential economic and security issue for both nations. Chinese military advisors now operate sophisticated surveillance systems along Venezuela's eastern border, while Russian technicians maintain advanced air defense systems that could deny American air access to Venezuelan territory during any regional conflict. These capabilities represent more than advisory support. They constitute the establishment of hostile military infrastructure in America's traditional sphere of influence. The implications extend beyond immediate regional concerns to encompass fundamental questions about American deterrence capabilities when facing proxy conflicts supported by peer competitors operating from positions that could threaten U.S. homeland security and critical economic interests throughout the Caribbean basin. Historical context. Venezuela's current territorial expansionism builds on historical grievances dating to the 1899 arbitration that established the current Venezuela-Guyana border, but the military capabilities now being deployed represent a fundamental escalation that transcends historical precedent. Understanding the strategic significance requires examining how external powers have transformed a regional border dispute into a potential flashpoint for global competition. The Maduro regime's survival has depended increasingly on Chinese economic support and Russian military assistance, as international sanctions and economic collapse have eliminated other sources of foreign currency and advanced military technology. This dependency has created opportunities for China and Russia to establish military presence in Venezuela that serves broader strategic objectives beyond simply supporting the Maduro government. Chinese investments in Venezuelan infrastructure, including ports, airfields, and communication systems, have created dual-use capabilities that can support both civilian economic activities and military operations designed to project Chinese influence throughout the Caribbean and northern South America. The Belt and Road Initiative in Venezuela serves strategic military objectives alongside economic development. Russian military assistance has evolved from simple arms sales to comprehensive advisory relationships that include training Venezuelan forces in advanced weapon systems while establishing Russian technical personnel in positions that provide intelligence access and operational influence over Venezuelan military planning and capabilities. Now we come to the most critical part of this assessment. The discovery of potentially 11 billion barrels of proven oil reserves in Guyana's Essequibo territorial waters has transformed the strategic calculation for all parties involved. For Venezuela, successful territorial acquisition could provide economic resources necessary for regime survival, while demonstrating Chinese and Russian support for territorial expansion against Western-aligned neighbors. The timing of escalated territorial claims corresponds with increased Chinese and Russian military presence in Venezuela, suggesting coordination between Venezuelan territorial ambitions and broader Chinese and Russian strategies for establishing permanent military capabilities in the Western Hemisphere that could threaten American strategic interests. Brazil's recognition of the threat represented by Venezuelan territorial expansion has led to unprecedented military preparations along Brazil's northern border, creating the potential for a regional arms race that could draw in multiple South American nations while providing opportunities for Chinese and Russian military expansion throughout the region. Current events layer intelligence reports from the past 72 hours reveal dramatic acceleration in Venezuelan military preparations along the Guyana border, with satellite imagery showing the deployment of Russian-supplied armored vehicles, artillery systems, and air defense capabilities positioned for potential offensive operations rather than defensive deployments. The most concerning development involves the activation of Chinese-built surveillance systems that provide comprehensive monitoring of Guyanese military positions, civilian infrastructure, and offshore oil operations. This intelligence gathering capability suggests preparation for coordinated military operations that could target both Guyanese government facilities and international oil company operations simultaneously. Recent signals intelligence indicates increased encrypted communications between Venezuelan military commanders and foreign advisors, suggesting coordination of operational planning that extends beyond routine military exercises to encompass actual conflict scenarios involving occupation of disputed territory and defense against regional military responses. The element that nobody talks about but changes the entire picture is, they say, the role of international oil companies as potential targets and strategic assets in any Venezuelan military operation. ExxonMobil, Hess Corporation, and CNOOC operate extensive offshore drilling platforms in disputed waters that could become military objectives or strategic leverage in negotiations following military action. In the diplomatic sphere, we've documented Venezuelan efforts to isolate Guyana within regional organizations while building support among nations dependent on Venezuelan oil supplies. These efforts suggest comprehensive planning for post-conflict legitimization of territorial acquisition through regional diplomatic pressure. Brazilian military intelligence reports unusual activity at Venezuelan airfields near the Brazilian border, including the deployment of aircraft and support equipment that could be used for rapid territorial occupation or enforcement of exclusion zones that would prevent international intervention during the critical initial phases of military operations. Actors' internal motivations. Venezuelan regime survival calculations. From Maduro's perspective, territorial expansion represents both an economic necessity for regime survival and an opportunity to demonstrate the effectiveness of Chinese and Russian support against traditional American hemispheric dominance. The regime's domestic legitimacy depends increasingly on external victories that can distract from internal economic collapse. Venezuelan strategic planning treats territorial acquisition as a solution to multiple regime vulnerabilities simultaneously, providing access to oil revenues necessary for government finance, demonstrating effective leadership to domestic audiences, and validating the alliance relationship with China and Russia that provides the regime's primary external support. The calculation includes assessment that American response capabilities are constrained by competing global priorities, while regional military capabilities are insufficient to prevent successful territorial occupation during the critical initial period of any military operation. Chinese strategic positioning. Beijing views Venezuelan territorial expansion as an opportunity to establish precedent for Chinese support of territorial acquisition by ally nations, while testing American resolve in hemispheric conflicts that could provide intelligence about American response capabilities and alliance reliability in other theaters. Chinese strategic interests include securing access to Venezuelan and potentially Guyanese oil resources, while establishing permanent military presence in the Western Hemisphere that serves broader competition with American global influence and provides operational capabilities that could threaten American strategic interests during future conflicts. Russian power projection. Moscow's support for Venezuelan territorial expansion serves multiple strategic objectives, including demonstrating Russian capability to project military influence in traditional American spheres while creating precedents for territorial revision that support Russian territorial claims in other regions. Russian involvement provides opportunities to test American response capabilities and alliance coordination in hemispheric conflicts while establishing permanent military presence that complicates American strategic planning for conflicts in other theaters where Russian interests are engaged. Brazilian regional leadership. Brazil recognizes that successful Venezuelan territorial expansion would establish precedents for territorial revision throughout South America, while demonstrating the ineffectiveness of regional institutions and Brazilian leadership in maintaining stability and international law. Brazilian military planning treats Venezuelan territorial expansion as an existential threat to Brazilian regional influence that requires military response regardless of international support, creating potential for regional conflict that extends beyond the immediate territorial dispute. Guyanese survival strategy. Guyana's strategic position requires balancing requests for international support against the reality that military assistance may not arrive quickly enough to prevent territorial occupation, leading to diplomatic strategies that emphasize international legal frameworks while developing contingency plans for government continuity under partial territorial occupation. Colombian security calculations. Colombia views Venezuelan territorial expansion as a direct threat to Colombian territorial integrity and regional stability, leading to coordination with Brazilian military planning while seeking American security guarantees that could deter broader Venezuelan territorial ambitions. Demorsa, strategic conflict areas. Offshore energy infrastructure. The concentration of oil exploration and production facilities in disputed territorial waters creates immediate targets for Venezuelan military action while providing strategic assets that could be used as leverage in post-conflict negotiations with international oil companies and their government sponsors. Intelligence assessments identify over 200 offshore platforms and support vessels operating in disputed waters that could be seized, destroyed, or used as bargaining chips in any territorial conflict, creating immediate economic consequences that extend far beyond regional boundaries to affect global energy markets and international investment confidence. Regional military balance. This is where the real breakdown begins. The integration of Chinese surveillance systems with Russian air defense capabilities and Venezuelan ground forces creates comprehensive military capabilities that could deny regional military access while establishing territorial control that would require significant international military intervention to reverse. Brazilian military capabilities, while substantial, are positioned primarily for Amazonian operations rather than rapid response to territorial conflicts in northern regions, creating time advantages for Venezuelan operations that could establish facts on the ground before effective regional response could be organized. International legal frameworks. Venezuelan territorial claims challenge existing international legal frameworks while providing opportunities for China and Russia to demonstrate support for territorial revision based on historical claims rather than existing international boundaries, creating precedents that could be applied to territorial disputes in other regions. Caribbean security environment. Venezuelan control of Essequibo territory would extend Venezuelan military capabilities to the Caribbean coast, creating opportunities for interdiction of shipping traffic and potential threats to Caribbean nations that host American military facilities or support American regional security operations. Supply chain vulnerabilities. Regional conflict could disrupt shipping lanes that carry significant portions of American energy imports while threatening stability of aluminum and bauxite supplies that are essential for American aerospace and defense industries, creating economic vulnerabilities that extend beyond immediate regional concerns. The multipolar reality. The Venezuelan territorial crisis represents a direct challenge to American hemispheric leadership by Chinese and Russian powers seeking to establish permanent military presence in traditionally American spheres of influence. This transformation reflects broader global competition where regional conflicts serve as testing grounds for great power rivalry rather than isolated local disputes. Unlike previous Latin American conflicts that occurred during periods of clear American hegemony, the current crisis unfolds in a multipolar environment where American response capabilities are constrained by competing global priorities while adversaries possess advanced military technologies that can deny American air and naval access to conflict zones. The success of Chinese economic integration and Russian military assistance in Venezuela demonstrates to other regional nations that alternatives to American partnership exist, potentially encouraging other governments to pursue relationships with authoritarian powers that offer immediate benefits without the governance requirements associated with American support. The factor that nobody discusses but transforms the entire equation is the precedent that successful territorial expansion would establish for territorial revision based on historical claims rather than existing international boundaries. Chinese territorial claims in the South China Sea, Russian territorial ambitions in Eastern Europe, and other territorial disputes globally could be legitimized through Venezuelan success in territorial acquisition. The implications extend beyond immediate regional consequences to encompass fundamental questions about the effectiveness of international law, the reliability of American security guarantees, and the ability of democratic nations to maintain territorial integrity against authoritarian powers willing to use military force for territorial expansion. For American global strategy, failure to prevent territorial expansion in the Western Hemisphere would signal declining American power to allies and adversaries globally while establishing permanent hostile military presence that could threaten American homeland security and strategic interests throughout the Caribbean for decades to come. As we confront this escalating crisis, the fundamental question facing American leadership is whether we can prevent territorial expansion in our own hemisphere without triggering broader regional conflict that could provide opportunities for expanded Chinese and Russian military presence throughout Latin America. The answer will determine more than regional stability. It will establish whether American hemispheric leadership remains credible in an era of great power competition, and whether territorial revision through military force becomes an acceptable strategy for authoritarian powers seeking to challenge the post-Cold War international order. This challenge requires developing response capabilities that can deter territorial expansion while avoiding escalation that could justify expanded Chinese and Russian military involvement in regional conflicts throughout the Western Hemisphere. The stakes extend beyond immediate territorial concerns to encompass fundamental questions about American strategic credibility, alliance reliability, and the preservation of international legal frameworks that prevent territorial conflicts from spreading throughout regions where multiple powers maintain competing territorial claims. The future of American hemispheric leadership and global strategic credibility may depend on our response to Venezuelan territorial expansion and our ability to maintain regional stability while preventing the establishment of permanent hostile military presence in America's traditional sphere of influence. Thank you for your attention to this critical assessment. The developments I've outlined tonight represent the most serious challenge to American hemispheric security since the Cuban Missile Crisis, with implications that extend far beyond regional boundaries to encompass global strategic competition and the future of international law. The territorial expansion preparations currently underway in Venezuela represent more than regional instability. They constitute a direct test of American resolve and capability in our own strategic backyard, at a time when global commitments strain our response capabilities. I'll continue monitoring this rapidly evolving situation and will provide updated assessments as these dangerous developments unfold. The security of American strategic interests and the stability of the entire Western Hemisphere depend on understanding and responding effectively to this escalating crisis. Thank you and good evening.